Are Israel and Turkey headed for conflict? Once close allies, over the past 2 decades, tensions have steadily risen between these two Eastern Mediterranean powers. However, matters now seem to be close to boiling point. Against the backdrop of growing tensions in Syria, there's a very real threat of a confrontation between Israeli and Turkish forces. So, just what exactly has shaped this collapse in relations, and could we really be about to see another dangerous conflict erupt in the Middle East? Hello and welcome. If you're new to the channel, my name is James Ker-Lindsay, and here I take an informed look at international relations, conflict, security, and statehood. Alliances have always been a central feature of international relations. But while we often think of them as long-lasting and based on shared political, economic, cultural, and even geopolitical interests, sometimes even the closest collaborations can collapse. In extreme cases, what was once a powerful partnership can break down so that two former allies become strategic opponents, if not outright enemies. One of the most interesting examples in contemporary international politics is the relationship between Israel and Turkey. At one time, the two countries were close strategic partners with extremely strong defence and intelligence cooperation. And yet, that has now disappeared. In fact, the two countries seem to be on the brink of war. Israel and Turkey are situated at the eastern end of the Mediterranean. Approximately 120 miles or 200 kilometres apart, they share a border with Syria. Covering 780,000 square kilometres or 300,000 square miles, Turkey is significantly larger than Israel, which measures 21,000 square kilometres or 8,000 square miles. Turkey also has a much larger population, around 88 million inhabitants, versus Israel's 9.5 million. Although Turkey and Israel are relatively modern states, founded in 1923 and 1948 respectively, their relationship dates back centuries to the Ottoman Empire. At its height, this ruled large parts of the Middle East, including present-day Israel, and had a long history of providing sanctuary for Jews fleeing persecution in Europe. However, our story truly begins in the aftermath of the Second World War with the establishment of the State of Israel. While Turkey voted against the UN plan to partition Palestine, thus creating a Jewish state, and later abstained in the vote to admit Israel to the United Nations, on the 28th of March 1949, it became the very first Muslim-majority country to recognise Israel, establishing diplomatic relations shortly afterwards. This decision was based in part on a shared geostrategic outlook. As the Cold War took hold, both countries saw themselves as firmly aligned to the Western camp. In addition, they also shared a similar ideological worldview, with both countries founded on secular nationalist traditions. Over the following decades, the relationship between Turkey and Israel slowly but steadily evolved. Although Turkey had a generally distant relationship with much of the Arab world, preferring to focus on Europe and the West, Ankara was nevertheless cautious about putting its ties with the wider Middle East under unnecessary pressure by being seen as getting too close to Israel. At the same time, there were domestic political concerns that such ties could cause resentment amongst the more religious parts of Turkish society, which strongly favoured the Palestinian cause. As a result, successive Turkish governments, while building relations with Israel, would often be forced to take a step back at points of heightened tension in the Middle East. Ultimately, the golden age of Turkish-Israel relations came in the 1990s. As the Cold War ended and the first steps were taken towards building peace between the Israelis and Palestinians, the pace of Turkish-Israeli cooperation increased dramatically. In 1991, diplomatic relations were strengthened, paving the way for a free trade agreement. However, the relationship shone especially brightly in the field of military and security engagement. In addition to growing defence industry cooperation, the two countries also signed several high-profile training agreements. But while Israel and Turkey had seemingly built a strong relationship, it turned out to be not nearly as secure as it may have appeared. The critical moment of change came in November 2002 when the religiously oriented Justice and Development Party, the AKP, led by Recep Tayyip Erdogan, won national elections in Turkey. Although the party insisted that the country would remain close to the West and would pursue European Union membership, Turkish foreign policy began to pivot in other areas, focusing more closely on the Arab Middle East. At first, though, the change was handled carefully to ensure that Turkey didn't alienate Israel. Instead, Ankara tried to present itself as an honest broker between the sides. However, as the decade wore on, cracks began to emerge as the Turkish government became steadily more critical of Israeli policies towards the Palestinians. This came to international attention following a heated exchange between Erdogan and the Israeli President Shimon Peres at the World Economic Forum in Davos in 2009. But the critical moment came the following year. In May 2010, a convoy of Turkish ships tried to take aid supplies to Gaza, which was under Israeli blockade. Although they were in international waters, the lead vessel was raided by Israeli commandos, leading to 9 deaths and over 30 injuries. Furious about the incident, Turkey now withdrew its ambassador to Israel. With the once solid relationship now in tatters, Erdogan became an increasingly vocal critic of Israel on the international stage. I hope you're finding this helpful. If so, please do consider giving it a like and perhaps subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. Thanks so much, and now back to the video. In March 2013, President Obama arranged a call between Erdogan and his Israeli counterpart, Benjamin Netanyahu. In return for an Israeli apology, the two countries agreed to restore diplomatic relations. And 3 years later, the Israeli government agreed to pay $20 million in compensation to the families of those killed in the raid. But while it seemed as if relations were now back on track, the progress was short-lived. In May 2018, relations again nosedived, this time after heavy fighting in Gaza. But in January 2022, the countries began yet another effort to rebuild relations. This led to the first direct phone call between the Turkish and Israeli foreign ministers in 13 years. From there, things moved quickly. Just weeks later, Erdogan welcomed the Israeli president to Ankara. In what was widely seen as a genuine breakthrough in bilateral relations, the two leaders discussed a range of critical issues, including expanding trade and developing greater energy cooperation. But once again, the thaw was short-lived. Just 18 months later, it collapsed again, setting the stage for the current confrontation. The spur for the latest deterioration in relations was Hamas's surprise attack on Israel on the 7th of October 2023. As Israel retaliated with a full-scale military campaign in Gaza, Erdogan became increasingly outspoken about the Israeli offensive, openly accusing Israeli leaders of committing war crimes and genocide. All this came to a head in November 2024 when Turkey severed diplomatic ties with Israel. But while the events in Gaza saw relations collapse yet again, the critical development came just a few weeks later when the 50-year Assad regime in Syria was overthrown by the Islamist HTS militia and its Turkish-backed allies. This has seen Turkey emerge as a key international actor in the country. At the same time, Turkey maintains a military presence in northern Syria, where the existence of a de facto autonomous Syrian Kurdish region is seen by Ankara as a threat to peace and security in the adjoining Kurdish areas of southeast Turkey. And it's all this that's been feeding the current tensions. Seeing the expanding Turkish role in Syria as a substantial security threat, on the 2nd of April, Israel carried out airstrikes against several Syrian military installations, including 2 air bases that Ankara was reportedly eyeing up as potential bases for its forces. Indeed, Israel was clear that the attacks had been directed at Turkey, accusing Ankara of playing a negative role in Syria and arguing that it was trying to make the country a Turkish protectorate. The Israeli defense minister warned the new government in Damascus that it would pay a heavy price if it allowed hostile forces to be stationed in the country. So, will Turkey and Israel go to war? Given their poor relations in recent years and Israel's very clear statement over Turkish encroachment in Syria, it would seem that the two countries are certainly on a dangerous collision course. That said, it's vital to put all of this in its proper context. For a start, as dangerous as any confrontation is, there's every chance that it will be limited to Syria. Neither state will want to escalate it into a conflict on their national territories. And while there could well be armed confrontations between Turkish and Israeli forces in Syria, the two countries may also focus on using local proxies and even cyber attacks to fight one another more indirectly. Secondly, the two countries have also taken steps to avoid any unwanted escalation of tensions. This came to international attention with news reports that Azerbaijan had hosted talks between Turkish and Israeli officials designed to set up a deconfliction mechanism between the two countries. Meanwhile, although the Turkish foreign minister has insisted that these are technical talks and limited only to operational coordination and don't mark the start of any broader normalisation of ties or the re-establishment of diplomatic relations, this is nevertheless a welcome sign. But while all this is certainly reassuring, it shouldn't be a cause for complacency. Even if fighting between Israel and Turkey remains limited to Syria, the broader international implications of any conflict could be enormous. Such a confrontation, especially if fought with local proxies, could well plunge Syria back into chaos and draw in other regional actors. In this sense, it would have the potential to reignite the civil war, potentially opening an even more deadly and dangerous phase of the conflict. More to the point, given that even seemingly localised situations can easily get out of hand, and that both Israel and Turkey are significant regional military powers, the potential for a disastrous escalation is obvious. Meanwhile, matters are all the more worrying as many observers will also be questioning whether the United States, which would usually be expected to manage such a crisis, would have the capability to act. And it's for all these reasons that the growing tensions between Turkey and Israel, close allies turned regional foes, are now being viewed with such deep concern. I hope you found that useful. If so, here are some more videos that you might find helpful. Thanks so much for watching, and see you in the next video.